every Friday at this time is Colonel Gordon Kakulu. Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Kakulu is the author of 3 books. Separated at Birth, How North Korea Became the Evil Twin. That was written in honor of his family, specifically his father, who served in the Korean War. He served in Vietnam as a Green Beret, infantry, and he wrote the book Gitmo, Inside Gitmo. He also wrote, most recently, with his wife, Warrior Police. He is president of the Valhalla Project, an organization that is dedicated to post 9/11 vets. Colonel Kakulu, welcome back.
Oh, great to be back, Crane. Thank you. Here it is Friday again. Wow.
Yeah, it moves quickly, and I'm going to be doubling up with you next week. I'm just putting the request right now for you because we've got
Sure.
so much
Let's
to
do
cover. And I begin tonight, obviously, with General Shinseki. Now, that he was firing people. He was reforming the way they would manage wait lists and wait times and not reward people based solely on that, recognizing that that was creating an incentive to lie, I guess. But what really struck me was his comments about integrity and people not telling him the truth. Now, here's a man who served with you in the sense of the same war, Vietnam. You all won it. Politicians gave it away. So you tell me, is this a good first step in your mind?
Say that again.
Is it a good first step in your mind that he is resigning?
Well, it might be if it wasn't going to be so terribly politicized, which I think that we know that's going to happen. Certainly it was refreshing to hear him speak that way because if to nobody else, it spoke to the vets. Perhaps a lot of the civilian audience may not really understand I'm sorry for the rooster in the back.
You never have to apologize for the rooster crowing, sir.
But for some of the civilians, it might seem a bit odd for him to emphasize that, and for the politicians, they probably will be totally befuddled by those kinds of remarks. But for the veterans, we certainly understand that because your word is your bond, and in a combat situation, you're relying on that person on either side of you or that unit on either side of you to do what they say they're going to do. And so, I have to say, Crane, that my own experience when I retired in '87, I went to work for a Fortune 50 company, which shall be unnamed. Mm-hmm. But I found the same thing, that the lack of integrity in the upper management was really startling to me. And it was very difficult for me to transition and adapt to that. And finally, after a few years, I ended up leaving that employer because of that very reason. So I think that this is indicative of the corruption and the dysfunction that riddles the Veterans Administration. And I'd ask your listeners to think about this for a second. Look at the Veterans Administration aiming at a very select, relatively small group of veterans in the population, if you take a percentage of the population as a whole, as what was purported to be an idealized form of government health care. The VA was held up by Paul Krugman and others as a shining example of what we should look forward to with Obamacare. Well, I think Krugman was right, at least in the second part, but not in the first part. This is exactly what we should look forward to in a national health program.
And we discussed, I believe, earlier this week, and we may have over the weeks with you. I've forgotten, sir, pardon me, but we played that one clip of, I believe, Senator Durbin speaking to the VA as the shining example for Obamacare. Speaking of President Obama, here's what he had to say. It's good that he takes responsibility. Keep in mind, he didn't blame roll it.
More broadly, how much responsibility do you personally bear as this being an issue you campaigned on and cared about deeply, you said cared about deeply during your administration, now that we're at this point?
Well, I will leave it up to the Justice Department to make determinations in terms of whether there's been criminal wrongdoing. In terms of responsibility, as I've said before, This is my administration. I always take responsibility for whatever happens, and this is an area that I have a particular concern with. This predates my presidency. When I was in the Senate, I was on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I heard firsthand veterans who were not getting the kinds of services and benefits that they had earned. And I pledged that if I had the privilege of serving as Commander-in-Chief and President, that we would fix it. The VA is a big organization that has had problems for a very long time. In some cases, management problems, in some cases, funding problems. And so what we've tried to do is to systematically go after the problems that we were aware of and fix them.
Well, there's a lot of evidence to say they were aware of these problems, and news reports, transition team, definitely put more money into it. But I'll tell you something. When General Shinseki apologized this morning, I look at that man and I say, this man served his country. He left a part of him over in a war zone. And he, as you said, he apologized to the veterans. And he was let down by people that were told, and I'm not saying he's taking responsibility. That's what I saw, taking responsibility. Tell me if I'm wrong here. I'm a civilian. I haven't been in the Veterans Administration, haven't gotten health care there, but I'll tell you this. That sounded like a political answer, especially with what predates my presidency, when he's on the Veterans Committee going into his presidency. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, I think it's really, if he thought about what he said, it should be horribly embarrassing. In other words, he said, before I even became president, I knew that there was a problem in the Veterans Administration. That kind of, it begs the question. I was waiting for the reporter to say, well, why didn't you do something about it? This business about, well, we fiddled here and, we noodled over there and, we made an adjustment over here. If you knew going in that this was going to be one of your, your things that you had to fix, one of your blame Bush things, then fix it. You had 5 years. Come on. The tweaking around the edges that these people think is a fix, or simply writing a memo or telling an aide, go fix the Veterans Administration, even if that much was done, which I tend to doubt. That's not fixing. Fixing is when the leader gets on the ground, when he makes surprise visits, when he goes in and appoints an independent inspector general and says, go shake down this system and see what it needs. And that can be a good thing. You can go in and you can make improvements. There's no system devised by human beings is perfect, Crane. You and the listeners know that. So there's always room for improvement. But it strikes me, and then this bogus, well, I take responsibility for everything. Maybe in the heat of the moment, when you're answering a question, but where does that responsibility go? It goes to the next news cycle, and then we hope everybody forgets about it.
Let's speak to the president and the West Point speech earlier this week. Here is just one clip from there, and we can, and I'll highlight some other quotes and ask you because of what he references and also what he believes. And I want to know specifically, do you agree with the president? And is this someone, as a president, as a leader, that you would follow into battle? Here is the president's cut 24. I'm jumping ahead. My team's amazing. They follow me. Roll it.
I believe in American exceptionalism with every fiber of my being. But what makes us exceptional is not our ability to flout international norms and the rule of law. It is our willingness to affirm them through our actions. And that's why I will continue to push to close Gitmo, because American values and legal traditions do not permit the indefinite detention of people beyond our borders. That's why we're putting in place new restrictions on how America collects and uses intelligence, because we will have fewer partners and be less effective if a perception takes hold that we're conducting surveillance against ordinary citizens.
Colonel,
I think the guy lives in a vacuum. Here we go again. he's going to close Gitmo. Who's going to close Gitmo in 2008? You know, that was his that was one of his big campaign things. Where have you been the last 5 years? Charles Krauthammer a few weeks back made the comment that President Obama acts as if he was on a White House tour and then walked into the Oval Office and discovered that he was president. You know, it's mind-boggling to me that he says this thing and expects people to take him seriously. Close Gitmo? You know, fix the VA? Is this going to be in his third term? I mean, when are we talking about doing this, Crane? You know, and then this business about I believe in American exceptionalism, but then we're not really going to be exceptional. We're just going to go along with the international community, whatever they want to do. Well, we've seen how well that worked. Right now, our State Department just issued a bulletin and said every American citizen get out of Libya. That certainly wasn't a success. You know, we're looking at tens of thousands of dead in Syria, where you know we had numerous red lines. The administration is patting themselves on the back about what a great job we've done in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Putin's annexed the Crimea and he's moved into eastern Ukraine, and is threatening his neighbors. And I'm sure has not broken a sweat because the president really believes with every fiber in his being in American exceptionalism.
Colonel?
I mean, the whole thing's a joke.
Yeah, Colonel, and just on that note, they say, in essence, it's a little more nuanced, it's a little more complicated than what we and you have just stated in the fact of the reality on the ground, that there are a lot of things that have been achieved, and the fact is it's just a little more complicated than the media, and a lot of those critics just don't really understand it.
Yeah, that's a typical reaction to this thing. In other words, you, I, and the listeners, Crane, are just too stupid to understand, you know, the basics, things like, you know, murders of ambassadors and, you know, illegal transfer of arms and annexation of territory, you know, that belonged to an ally and abandoning that ally. We're just not bright enough. I guess, you know, if we had numerous Ivy League degrees and, you know, had hung around with known or suspected terrorists, then we'd probably be smart enough to understand these things. But when the State Department tells you it's nuanced, that means they don't know what they're doing either. You know, I worked there for 3 years, and I know the code language that they use. Nuance means we don't have a clue.
Tell me, why is it
I
that...
don't know why I'm laughing. I mean, this is
no,
tragic.
because what's happened, I believe, is something where you sit back and you just go, it's Bizarro World.
It
and
really
you're
is.
hearing.
I mean, it's like that movie years and years ago that, you know, the younger listeners won't remember. It's a mad, 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 mad world. I mean, it's just absolutely bizarre, as you said, bizarro to look at this stuff. And they're doing it with a straight face, and they're expecting us to sit there and applaud and say, wow, how wonderful this is.
Well, that's exactly what they're asking.
Cadets had some sense. They didn't applaud the guy.
Yeah, he got a very, very, was described as icy reception. But that goes to another thing. To be a leader, it seems the president is doing what the left oftentimes does in the way of analyzing a problem and saying this policy will fix it. And there's no follow-up to say, well, once it fails, we're going to tell you how it fails, and then we're too stupid to understand. Where do we go from here, Colonel?
Well, you know, you just put your finger on the pulse of the whole problem. There's no follow-up here. You know, rhetoric is assumed to be an end in and of itself. There's no action, and there's no accountability for the action. That's why they can sit there and say, well, you know, we said we were going to fix the VA and feel good about it, and yet there was no action, there was no follow-up, there was no checks and balances, and it's that way across the board. So what we have is a situation where the regulatory agencies, you know, every three-letter agency on the Potomac has sensed a vacuum of this leadership, and what's happening is that the bureaucrats are taking control. So we've got all these egregious actions around the country.
Yes,
EPA, BLM, you know, ATF, you name it, IRS, and it's just the bureaucrats running with the power that they have, or that they think they have, or that they can accumulate because leadership is absent.
Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Kakulu, 3 times an author. He is currently the president of the Valhalla Project. Once again, following show, we'll post. You all like it, get to know it, and we will be doubling up next week because there's just that much content we need to get to with the great Colonel. Thanks so much, sir. Great to be with you.
Always good to be with you. I hope the listeners and you have a great weekend.
You too. Take care. Coming up, a friend of the Colonel's and ours, Ben Johnson, LifeSite News, AFR Talk.